everybody, my name is Emma and this is Emma Rosen Books. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that's been playing on my mind. As a YouTuber, you know, I make videos about reading and I make videos about writing. You know, I want to make content that you know, a range of people are interested in, and as a writer I want to write books that a range of people want to read. But obviously I'm aware that the book that I've written, which is Milk, which is a story of breastfeeding in a society that's forgotten how, I'm aware that that's kind of niche. And whereas other author tubers, maybe when they talk about their book, it's, you know, let's say somebody's written a fantasy book or a sci-fi book or a contemporary fiction book or whatever. Okay, if you don't like that genre, then maybe you're not going to be interested. But a lot of those books are going to have mass appeal. And often I feel when I talk about my book, I feel like, well, who's gonna be that interested in what I have to say? I worry that people are, you know, scared off, maybe, you know, because they think that it, you know, that it's a book that maybe they don't want to read, they don't need to read. You know, I just kind of have had that playing around in my mind, that when I'm talking about this book I think, well, loads of people who watch my videos aren't going to be interested in buying my book. So when I'm saying, buy my book, well, most of you will probably be going, no thanks. But I just felt like I needed to address the fact that this is a book written in a way for a particular market, but I actually don't think it is. So, my kind of clickbaity title of why you should buy my book. Of course you should buy my book. My book is great. Right. So I've written about breastfeeding, and I've talked before about why I have written a book about breastfeeding, why it matters to me. But the thing is, it's one thing to write a book that matters to me, it's quite another to make that book that somebody else wants to read, because of course I want to read my book. But breastfeeding, first of all, really matters. You know, it's not just something that just matters to me or just matters to women who breastfeed. It matters on a societal level. I mean, there are several issues to consider. One is, lots of people like to talk about the health benefits and economical benefits and environmental benefits of breastfeeding, and I always feel like I don't like to talk about them too much because I think lots of people talk about it, and I don't necessarily know that it's the right line to go down, because I think lots of people are aware of the benefits of breastfeeding in that respect. But, you know, there is that breastfeeding is good for lots of different things. But to me, what's more at the core of it is that if somebody wants to breastfeed, if they've made that decision, they've decided on their goals, then they should feel supported to do so. They should be able to reach their goals, whatever they may be, whether that's to breastfeed for a day or 6 years. And that's not just supported by their partner or the health professionals or whatever, but by society at large. And I think it's important, therefore, that people have an understanding of what breastfeeding is, what it feels like to be inside that relationship and inside that world. I've said before that we have around about 80% of women start out breastfeeding, and that drops off to something like 30%, I think it's 34% or thereabouts, giving any breast milk at all by 6 months, and 1% who are breastfeeding exclusively at 6 months. That's a huge drop off, and actually there's a massive fall just within the first couple of weeks. And what that says to me is not that it's about persuading people that they should breastfeed, but about supporting people who want to breastfeed, who give it a go, to continue to breastfeed for as long as they wish. And when you talk to women, you know, I've spoken to lots of people who say, I wish I'd fed longer, or you know, that they had a hard time, they didn't feel supported, or they had to fight through stuff, and that's a big part of why I wrote this book, is because what we're lacking is an understanding of what breastfeeding is, how it feels, you know, and empathy, I guess. So first, that's the first reason why you should read my book, to get inside the head, because I talk in here about my experience of breastfeeding, and I know that other people's experience is going to be different, but it gives you an idea of one person's story. I also talk about lots of factual information too, so it helps you to understand how breastfeeding works, and where we are as a society, and why we're at that point. So what's the history that led up to here, what's the politics that led up to where we're at. So, you know, you get that understanding of what it's like, therefore you can be empathetic. Of course, around half of the population are gonna have a baby at some point. Now, I know not all women have babies, and by the way, I always think it's awesome when somebody doesn't want a kid and stands up for their right to not have a kid, because I think it's really easy to feel like pressured into, I get married, I have a baby, you know. So just as a sideline, if that's you, you're awesome. But yeah, I mean, I don't know the actual statistics for exactly what percentage of women do go on to have families, but if you have a baby, then that means that you're going to be being told information about breastfeeding, you're going to be thinking about how you want to feed your baby and what that might be like, and therefore I think that it's important to have a window into that world. Whatever you end up doing and whatever you end up deciding. And the other side of things is around half of the population are gonna support somebody who breastfeeds. Now, I'm generalising here because I'm talking about obviously men supporting women, and I know that obviously there's single sex relationships, so I am including, I know the percentages are going to be way off here, so that, you know, women who are supporting their female partners who are having babies and breastfeeding, and also the sort of trans relationships, trans men who have a baby and choose to breastfeed or chest feed. You know, I am also talking about all of those people, but a lot of the population, if you're not going to have a baby and be thinking about breastfeeding and those decisions, are going to be supporting somebody who is going through those experiences. And again, it can be really useful to think about what that's like. And again, even if you're a man or a woman who never has children, never wants to have children, whatever the situation, you are still likely to have friends who have children, and or family, you know, brothers, sisters, whatever, who have children. It is very helpful to know what they're going through, be knowledgeable and tooled up, because see, what's happened is where formula feeding has become more and more common, a lot of our parents would have formula fed us. You know, that's just the way it was for our generation. So they don't necessarily have the information to pass on to us. That then means that we're at a bit of a loss. If we can be well informed from reading experiences, asking questions, finding information, then as a society we can be supportive of women in that situation. I think I've laboured that point enough. Create this supportive, wonderful community. So you might be wondering, sure, but like, why do we need this supportive community? Well, I don't think it takes much to see stuff in the media that talks about, you know, a woman who's been told to cover up, a woman who's been thrown out of somewhere for breastfeeding, something about a woman who's breastfed till age whatever, all these various stories all the time. And of course, you know, they're not necessarily regular experiences, but it's sensationalised by the media. Not to say that those individual cases are sensationalised, but that you know, you see the negative, you don't necessarily see the good side of things. But lots of women experience in their day-to-day lives feeling uncomfortable about feeding around other people. I know that I felt uncomfortable feeding, particularly in front of my male relatives. Some women come up against people making comments about them feeding in public. It's rare, but it does happen. Far more common is people getting comments from people that they know well, saying things that are said with the best intentions, but have a lack of understanding. So, or when are you going to start giving a bottle? Is your baby hungry again? Aren't they using you as a dummy? Aren't they too old to breastfeed? There are lots of throwaway comments that aren't meant with any malice, but can be very undermining, particularly if you're going through a really hard time and you're feeling like you've got to keep your strength going to hang on in there, and you feel like you're not understood and you're not supported. And I had a lot of people, when I talked about any time that I had a problem, who'd say, well, just give them a bottle. You know, sort of like, I don't know what your problem is, that's just the way to fix it. And the thing is, breastfeeding problems need a breastfeeding solution. So you look at what the issue is within breastfeeding, you don't fix it by giving another method of feeding. The same as you couldn't say to a formula feeding mother, oh, well, why don't you just breastfeed the baby? You know, it doesn't, it doesn't work. That's not a way of fixing it. It may be something that somebody chooses, that's a whole different issue. But the point is that when you're constantly bombarded with it, it's hard. My point is it's not easy being a breastfeeding person in today's society, which is why I wrote the book. I had lots of trouble feeding my first, and you know, I'm still breastfeeding my third baby. I still have the odd little issue every now and again. I still feel uncomfortable sometimes. I don't particularly feed her in public anymore, just because she didn't really feed that much. But she's a toddler and she'd be all over the place. I don't know, because it has been a long time since I fed her in public, whether I'd be comfortable doing it. I'd certainly feel a bit uneasy. I'd do it because, you know, I'm ballsy, but I probably feel a bit anxious. I don't really get comments about it because people know how I feel about it. But as I say, it doesn't mean to say that I never come across an issue. I struggle with wanting to stop breastfeeding, even though I know that my daughter still wants to carry on breastfeeding. I frequently feel like I've had enough. And I have to kind of have the tenacity to hang in because it isn't time yet. I don't feel it's time yet, but another thing to bear in mind is that breastfeeding is not taught in schools. I taught biology for a long time, and I didn't really teach about breastfeeding very much. Briefly mentioned it maybe if you're talking about immunity, and in a human biology course that I used to teach, there was a little bit about lactation. It's not taught as standard, and yet all of those people that I taught who would go on to be parents, and I hadn't taught them anything about breastfeeding. I taught them about menstruation, and I taught them about conception, and I taught them about birth, but I hadn't taught them anything about what goes on afterwards. And yet we're defined as mammals, as, you know, as creatures that feed our babies with milk. So what I've tried to say in a long waffly way is that you might not be a breastfeeding woman or want to be a breastfeeding woman, and you might have heard me talking about my book and think, well, you know, I'm not interested, that's got nothing to do with me. And all I want to say is put out there that when I'm talking about this book that seems very niche, it's not as niche as you might think. And you might not read my book. You might read one of the other breastfeeding books out there, and there are many really good ones. I'm going to do a review later in the week about the Positive Breastfeeding book, that's really good. The Politics of Breastfeeding is one of my favourite books in the world. Loads of great books out there. But being informed, you might just go on the internet and read some stuff. But just knowing a little bit more about it and having a better understanding of why it's tricky, why it ends up being in the news, why people keep talking about it all the time, why it's a big deal. I think that if people had a little bit more understanding, then the world would be a slightly happier place, certainly for those of us who choose to breastfeed our babies. That was all quite like serious, and so I'd like to finish off, of course, saying that besides all of that, I'm an indie writer. I quit my job. I'm unemployed. I'm not unemployed, I'm self-employed. That doesn't make me any richer, it just makes me sound fancier. But I you know, support the indies. That's the other side of things. You know, this hasn't been published by a big company, it's been published by me, and I've worked really hard, and I would appreciate anybody's support. If you've been watching my videos and listening to what I say and you think that you might be interested, then please take a look. And if you're not interested, then that's cool, but still stick around to hear about future books and books that I've been reading. Please like if you did. Please comment below. I'd love to have a conversation with you in the comments section. Subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all for the next one. Bye!